Welcome back to the Energy Sovereignty Project. Well, I'm going to play a little clip here from yesterday, and it'll be edited for time, so we'll just kind of add this in here real quick. Here we are at the Energy Sovereignty Project on a warm day with a cool drink. And I thought I'd try a bit of an experiment. And so I'm going to pull a quick graphic up here that I got on the phone. And if what you see today looks a little unnatural, that's because it is. What I'm doing today is I am playing the part of an AI that is trying its damnedest to match the production of solar. In other words, it knows how much power it can send to the vehicle, it knows how much the vehicle needs, it knows how much the vehicle needs to be charged during the day. It also has a responsibility for keeping the home within a certain temperature all day. And it also has a responsibility to try and then shove as much power as it can into the batteries. Okay, well, I'm going to add in a little space to my right here because we're going to need to pull up some screenshots here as we talk about this. So, as I'm doing the Energy Sovereignty Project, I'm actually looking at the comments that people are making, looking to the questions that they have, and I'm trying to formulate little tests that I can do to answer some of these questions. And to be quite honest, for me too, because this is the first year that I've actually monitored the system this closely. Because of the way the batteries are set up, because of the way the Tesla app is set up, I have the ability now to monitor this system in ways that I simply didn't have the capabilities to do last year. And so here we are at the end of Total Solar Day on the 12th, and we are at the second day of some rather extreme heat. Yesterday peaked out at 108 degrees. Today peaked out somewhere around 105 degrees. Tomorrow is supposed to be somewhere around 102-ish, something like that. I'll let you guys know when we do the weekly closeout. We can follow along with this. But back to the point. The point of this is that yesterday I had this great idea that I was going to do an experiment where the home, for half of its production day, would basically try and track the performance of the solar panels in a way that might mimic one choice that an AI might choose to turn on smart appliances. We've talked a lot about the car and in ways that the car might interact with the system. Well, the system maybe can optimize it. Maybe the car could increase and decrease its charge according to the amount of load that was on the home and the amount of solar that was coming in. Wouldn't that be great? Well, I've been getting those questions for months, and I thought, wow, okay, well, let's go ahead and take a look at that. Well, here we'll pull up a graphic of that, and what you will see is during the first part of the day, that all went swimmingly. I thought that was a great idea. That's a marvelous idea. We'll do some laundry. We'll have the AC, and I'll watch it, every 5 minutes or so, and I can hear when the AC turns off. When the AC turns off, I'll trot back down and I'll increase the charge amount on the car. And as you can see by that graph, I did a pretty good job. There aren't a lot of holes in that graph. Well, that worked great up until about 1 or 2 when I started noticing, ooh, there's a big problem. And that big problem was the damn air conditioning. Holy crap. Well, normally the AC uses about 4 kilowatts or so, and I'm looking at the power output and I'm seeing like 5 and change, 6. What is going on? So then it dawns on me, well, not only is the AC on, but the house circulating fan is going on because the house is going bananas. It's trying to go ahead and keep its temperature at the 76 degrees that I had set it at. Oh, okay, well, I tried to set it at 78. And as you can see by this graph, that didn't really work either. Now, what I didn't do yesterday was something that I did today. Let's skip on that for just a second. So what you'll see in this graph is that the AC unit continued to crank until midnight. It was off and on. Well, my God, I was at 32% or so at total solar day, and normally this time of year we're using, I don't know, 18%. You saw, you've been following along, so you've been seeing that, you know, what we've been basically typically using overnight is somewhere in that range. Well, I tore up that entire 30% charge. By morning, I was actually even drawing just a little bit of power. We actually drew, it was funny because when morning came around, we actually just hit that point where solar, where the batteries had gone to zero just as the sun was coming up. You'll be able to kind of have a laugh about that when we look at that in the week in review. But the focus of this quick topic is going to be air conditioning and the efficiency of the solar panels. So one of the things that we'll see here, we'll go ahead and pull up the graph for today. And the first thing I'll pull up here is the graph showing just the solar contribution. And you'll see that it's not that nice parabola that we're used to. When we have our baseline days, when we looked at those baseline days from last month and previously, it was just this very beautiful parabola. You could see where the sun came up, you could see where it peaked out, you could see where it dropped off. Well, this one looks like someone tried to shove it over. Well, there are some crackles in there, and you can see that, and that is because we did actually have some high-level clouds that from time to time would produce that crackle. But the main thing to look at for this graph is that it's pushed over. Well, why is it pushed over? Well, it's pushed over because that's when the heat peaked. And so what you're actually watching there is when the solar panels actually start to lose their efficiency. You start getting up around that 110 degree region, and that's when you really start to see the panel suffering. Now, we didn't get quite that high. We got to around 108 yesterday, and then around 105 today. But it's still interesting that showed up in that. And so, obviously, around noon or so, a little after noon, I aborted that test. And then it was just, wow, okay, let's take a look at the AC. And so then obviously that's why I didn't actually release that video today showing how the efficiencies change from one method to another. I'll talk about that briefly just now because I may actually revisit that. I mean, it's something that might be interesting to look at. So my thought is that overall, on any given day, you have X amount of solar power, period. That's just what you have. And so I thought, okay, well, is there any advantage in having a system that's so smart that it can really just kind of track along with it and do it? Now, what I realized is that though there might be some benefit in doing that as far as vehicle charging goes, because, well, many different reasons really, but the main one is that if you wind up tracking that through the entire period when you're doing your production, then the net going into the battery might be zero. And the reason that that's not a terribly good idea and that it's maybe better to take a slug is that if you take a slug of charge on the car, then an AI system can examine the state of charge in the battery and at some point go, whoa, Junior, too much, and then go ahead and stop the charge and then alert the owner of the system so that then they can make a human decision as to whether or not they want to continue on the charge with the car. You need the car. Are you worried about drawing power from the grid? Those kinds of human decisions that might need to come into play. But what seems pretty clear is that this issue that we're having with the air conditioning very closely mimics the issue that we have on cloudy and rainy days, in that we can predict them to a great degree of accuracy. We know when it's going to be hotter than the hinges of hell. And when that happens, we know that two things are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is that the AC is going to be cranking. And you can make a choice. You can either leave the AC off and then try and ventilate the house when you get home after work. Or, in my case, I have to leave the AC on. My mom's 87. I'm not going to leave her sweltering in my house. That's not going to happen. And so in my case, 78 is about as high as I'm willing to go. And so that's what I did today, was I changed it from 76 degrees to 78 degrees. And that helped a little. We'll go over the studio, we'll go over to the studio in a minute here, and then we'll go over the numbers. But today I operated a slightly different modality. And like I was alluding to earlier, that today what I did was, as the temperature started to peel off, instead of leaving the house all shut up and basically holding its heat in the attic and holding its heat in the garage, I've actually opened the garage, I've opened the upstairs windows, and the circulating fan in the house is actually very efficient. And so once the exterior temperature has gone down now, what I've done is I've gone ahead and turned the house circulating fan on. So now, like I said, we're sitting at 27% for our total solar day, and that's a little less than what we had yesterday at that 33%. And so come morning, we'll see how we did. I'm going to go ahead and finish this video up in the studio tonight and go over some of the numbers for the day and kind of collect my thoughts a little bit after things kind of cool down a little bit, and start to script this out a little bit. Some folks have called me out for not scripting out some of what I say, so I tend to go over some of the same points more than once. And as we move forward, and as we're approaching that 2,000 subscriber mark, man, thanks guys. I have an increased responsibility to you guys to maybe up my game a little bit and honor that. I didn't expect to see this much interest in what we did. I figured it was going to be kind of a fringe thing. I figured maybe a couple hundred subscribers would be interested in this. But thank you very much. And so with that, let's go ahead and close out here, and we'll head back over to the studio and take a look at the graphs that I've looked at for the day yesterday and for today. And so I'll formulate my thoughts a little bit, and then we can discuss that a bit in greater detail. All right, well, first of all, welcome back to the studio. Grab yourself a tasty beverage and let's go ahead and crack into this, shall we? So, what an interesting couple of days. Not exactly the test that I wanted to present to you today, but I think that this is something that's a bit more interesting than what I had originally planned. So, to start off with, I have one change from what you saw in that opening piece on location. When I looked at the forecast for the 13th today, it was supposed to be 89 degrees, and that was nearly 20 degrees cooler than it had been on the 11th and the 12th. Well, I thought that that was a good opportunity that shouldn't be missed. So I waited one more day before closing this out to give us a chance to compare the two last days that were in excess of 105 degrees to a day that is relatively normal. And the reason I thought that was important to do was to give us a direct real-world relationship for the data about how quickly this can swing from 108 degrees to normal. And again, what I'm trying to show here is that rapidity of the change. And the reason that that's important is that that allows us to then draw that corollary between how we treat rainy days and overcast days. We can forecast those as well. It's very clear. We can do that days in advance. Why can't we do that then with the heat? And so that was what I thought would be important to take a look at. Now, I think that that's probably going to be more applicable at this time of the year and maybe at the close of August when you do see these kinds of swings. In July and August, I think we're going to wind up seeing more days back to back that are in excess of 102, 105 degrees. But we see the same thing in rainy days as well. So with that, let's go ahead and start by pulling the log entry for the 11th. So the day started off well enough, 33% in reserve, good day of production predicted. But what I failed to factor in was just how severe the heat was going to be and how that was going to be reflected not only in the increased AC use, but also in the efficiency decrease in the panels. Now, don't think that I'm getting blindsided by that, because those of you that have been following this from the beginning of the Energy Sovereignty Project, you guys already know, you've heard me talk about how we were going to show and discuss the extreme heat and how that causes efficiency issues in the panels in July and August. So what blindsided me was that I hadn't really expected to be talking about this in June. So last year and traditionally June is fairly mild and usually results in our greatest disparity between how much the home uses and how much energy production we get from solar. And we not only saw that in the numbers collected at the Energy Sovereignty Project home last year, but it's something that I've been monitoring here at the studio ever since we had the panels installed in 2014. So let's take another look at the graphs for these days. And so we'll start off with a half graph from the 11th. So this shows the best laid plans of the program. As you can see, what I was attempting to do was to track along with the solar production, and for X amount of the day, I'd track along and then calculate how much of the remainder of the day needed to be devoted to charging the battery. Well, that was when I noticed a couple of things were odd. First, I noticed that there was something strange going on with the AC, and so the rest of the day looked like this. So sorry about all the overlays. Apparently I didn't take a screenshot of the home use separated out, but it's all right. I'll walk you through what you're looking at. It'll be okay. So you can see the yellow arch. That's obviously the solar contribution. And so then what you see in blue is the home loads. Sometimes this peaks above the green, and what you're seeing there is that the solar contribution is tamping down the amount that the battery is producing. And so then you see some of that blue peak out there. But you can see that it's tracking pretty well. You know, if you look to the right when the sun is gone, that's another also, you can see that then the green tracks with the home load, and that's obviously because the battery at that point is supplying all of that load. But I'm doing a pretty good job of tracking in that early part of the day with the amount of solar contribution that is happening. Now, in this graph, what I wanted to draw your attention to is that big solid block of home load that appears between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. Okay? That is the AC. And it's AC not at our usual 4 kilowatts of draw, but instead it's around 5.5 kilowatts of draw. The remainder is what it is taking to run the home. Now, as I touched on in a previous video, the AC system at that particular home, it runs nearly exactly 4 kilowatts, but easily recognizable in some of the earlier charts is when the home's air circulation fans come on. Now they use about 1.5 kilowatts, It's a variable fan, so. But the home is actually relatively efficient in how it heats and cools itself. Okay, it works great doing that with cooling the home and mostly the lower level, and then circulating the air. It works great until you get to a certain temperature upstairs, where the upstairs thermostat registers too high of a temperature. There's too much of a difference between the upstairs and the downstairs, and when it does that, it not only runs the AC and its fans, it also kicks in the circulating fans and runs them simultaneously. And so back to the graph here, you'll see that from 8 a.m. to about 11 a.m., the test was going well. The home circulating fans came on for a short time and cycled off again. All that was normal. And the graph shows that, where I put in a load of laundry and the input to the vehicle, and so I would increase and decrease the amperage to the vehicle to keep it tracking. And I did a pretty good job. You don't see any spaces or anything in there, and so I was doing a pretty good job of tracking with productions. And so at times you can see that I exceeded solar production while I was doing this, but it was close enough that I felt that I would be able to present the concept to you guys, and then the idea was then to compare that with the following day and try and do the same thing and talk about the efficiencies of a system doing it one way versus the other. We'll come back to that later in the year. Obviously that test kind of fell apart because around 2 p.m. I noticed that there was a problem. The issue actually started about 11:30 a.m. when the AC kicked in and the home's consumption never really dropped below 6.3 kilowatts. Well, that wasn't going to leave a lot of freeboard to charge the batteries, much less charge the car. And so I figured I'd abort the test and then see what was going on. And in the graph, what you can see is right around 1 p.m. you'll notice this sharp little fall off back to a home consumption of 6.3 kilowatts. That's me where I end the test. I put in a little circle there, you can see that. And the home returns to its consumption with the AC and circulating fans running. Next, around 2 p.m., you see that rapid fall off. Well, that's actually the first time the AC system had shut off since 11:30 in the morning. And from 3:30 to around 4 p.m., that little spike that you see there is me completing the charge in the car like an idiot. So at that point, I basically thought the day was over. I had 30% remaining in the system, and I would make adjustments the next day for making up for what little I needed to make up for the losses, the excessive amount that I had taken from the system with that load of laundry and trying to charge the car and all of that. Well, I came to the studio here where I worked until a little after midnight, and when I returned home, the house was cool, the AC was off, so I didn't really think all that much about it. And I was tired, and the system had been at 30% at the end of total solar day, so it really just wasn't something that I was overly concerned about. I should have been, because this is what I woke up to. Yeah. You guessed it, 0% charge. And that little gray spike that you see, that's the batteries running out of power just as the sun came up. And then the system starting to draw from the grid power until the home's consumption can be matched by the production. So I pulled up the graphs that you saw previously. Let me go ahead and I did put two of these together here so to give you a better idea. So I took a look at these graphs to see where the hell the power went. Okay, well, at the end of total solar day at 8 p.m., you can see that the AC system had just kicked off. And that's when I left for the studio. And as you can see on this chart, around 9 p.m., the system kicked back on again. Well, unknown to me, the system was running at over 5 kilowatts pretty much the entire time that I was gone. And you can see that little dip that's there below the circle. That's where the AC shut off, but those circulating fans that I was telling you about kept running as the home attempted to circulate the warm air on the second story with the first story to ensure the house was cool. And the system had just shut off about the time that I got home and went to sleep, blissfully unaware that by midnight the total charge remaining in the system was probably something around 3%, and then the remainder of the morning just did that in. And on the 12th, I set the thermostat from 76 degrees to 78 degrees, and this gave me 3 separate shorter duration cooling cycles while the solar was producing, as opposed to the 2 huge AC run times that we had the previous day. And the other thing that I did was that in the evening I vented the top story instead of having it recirculate the air to try and cool it. Opened the windows upstairs and allowed that heat to escape and take some of the strain off of the AC. And that was reflected in our log with the home usage on the 11th being 65.5 kilowatt hours, and then on the 12th being 42 kilowatt hours. And the total production on the 11th was 59.6, and on the 12th was 59.1. So very similar, right? And so on the 11th it was 108 degrees peak. On the 12th it was 105 degrees peak. So really close in temperature, really close in the total output. Now let's compare the graph of the 12th with the graph of the 13th today. So this represents a more normal use scenario for this time of year. What a difference a day makes. So as you can see here, although there was an AC hit at midnight around 1 a.m. or so, and that's due to the system being set back to 76 degrees later in the day on the 12th, and then another shorter hit from, you can see there, 3:30 to 4 a.m. where you can see the circulating fans come back on. Consumption was manageable, as it has been all through March, April. And I'm not going to make too much of the comparison though from the 12th to the 13th as far as making any kind of determination as to what percentage of reduction we got from our output of the solar panels due to the heat. But I'll present a little bit of the raw data here. So on the 13th we had some clouds roll past, and that took a chunk out of the day's contribution. But the raw numbers had an average contribution of 59 kilowatt hours when the system was at that 105, 108 degree point, and 60 kilowatt hours on a day where, as you can see in this graph, cloud cover actually had reduced the solar contribution later in the day. So we'll keep watch over that for the next couple of days, and hopefully when we close out the week we'll have a day where it's relatively cooler temperatures and a nice smooth graph to then be able to compare that to the output that we had on those 2 days of high heat. And I don't know how much that's going to be useful to us, but once we get later on in the year in July and August where we have more of those days back to back, then obviously we'll increase that data set and we'll be able to draw some more accurate conclusions about just how much of an effect the heat has on tamping down our solar contribution. So with that, let's close with a spot that I recorded earlier today back at the system a few hours ago, and take it away, earlier me. Well, welcome back to the system and the end of our total solar day here on the 13th as we wrap up this short video. Now, by the time I get done with production here, I'll actually be able to have all of the numbers needed to close this out. So let's go ahead and put up the log here real quick for the 13th so you get an opportunity to see where we're at. Basically, it's a return to exactly what we've seen over the past several weeks. What a difference a day makes. The previous 2 days were quite interesting. It taught us a lot. It taught us what to expect as we go into the months of July and August, most certainly, where we'll wind up having more days back to back that are over 100 degrees. And with that, it'll allow us to form a bit of a strategy where we will be treating these very similar to the way that we treated the overcast and rainy days. We will hold more charge in the battery to be able to get us past the evenings. We will try and charge less, putting less charge into the vehicle. As you can see for today, we don't have any contribution to the vehicle. I'm actually still driving the loaner. My car is getting its windshield replaced. And so I didn't put a charge into the vehicle today. Be returning it tomorrow, and I'll have plenty of charge to get it back to the dealership. But this gives us an opportunity again to kind of take a look at what some of these warmer days are going to be like as we progress into summer, and also how quickly things recover. We'll pull this up. You can see today was forecast to be 89 degrees. I think it really only made it to about 85, 86 degrees. We have an immediate return to the efficiency of the panels. At the end of the day, we actually see some of that fracturing that's typical. We had some upper level clouds roll through late in the day, but you can trace that parabola through there, and you can see how the system performed right back to its normal performance. And so again, it's an easy thing to predict. You simply look at the forecast just like we did for the cloudy weather and try and operate the home accordingly. And I hope you found this video interesting. I know I sure did. And so with that, we'll close out in a couple of days. We'll do the recap for the second week in June, and we'll include obviously this data in that, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit more in the context of the week as a whole. And again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for following along. If these are the kinds of things that interest you, feel free to like and subscribe, and we will see you in a couple of days.